I'd like to discuss a topic which is the most important issue and question which one must ask. It relates to our existence, to our purpose, to our function, and our aspirations of applying and employing our endowments, our abilities, how to function within society, within the universe. Social interaction, intellectual interaction, scientific, theological. Nothing is not touched by this question. And most people don't even think of this. Never enters their minds. It's the most fundamental, basic question of one's life. Why do we exist? If a person understands why he exists, what is the purpose of his existence, then one's direction, focus, and perspective takes on a certain direction. But if one doesn't understand why he exists, at best, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, which you don't even know where the haystack is to locate the needle. That's how complicated and confusing one's mind becomes. In terms of one's vision, eyesight, when the eye itself is within a certain measure, not stretched, not expanded, one's vision is acute and one could have clarity. If it's stretched through strain, elasticized, one loses focus and one can no longer see. One has to be able to rein in, to be focused, to understand exactly what he is addressing. When we speak of analysis, if we understand what is before us, what its value is, even if we're able to come upon its makeup, in terms of the applications of whatever that object or item or entity may be, it gives us the ability to extend and expand our mind in terms of its applications. It's interesting to note every part of one's physical existence has a limited capacity. The hand, the leg. Within a slight degree of effort, especially if it's a great effort, that particular limb tires. The two parts of the body, relatively speaking, have unlimited capacity compared to other parts of the body in terms of their function. The eye. The eye is able to cover an expanse which is, relatively speaking, unlimited. The hand has great limitation. It can only engage with something which is within the proximity of that particular limb. The mind, even more than the eye, we're able to span our lifetime if a person is able to retain the information over his lifetime, in moments, almost like light years, the mind is able to instantaneously cover a lifetime. When we apply our intellect, when we evaluate something based on analysis, especially if one has the education, the experience, the orientation, the analysis is a different level of analysis. And the mind is able to delve and apply and have new insights, novel understanding, which people have never even fathomed. And even the person himself, it only comes once the intellect is activated and is excited that we come upon many things. But of course, all this is dependent on understanding one's purpose. However, before we even address what we refer to as the most important question of one's life, we first have to understand what is the origin of existence. Understanding its origin will determine the ability to address the question which we just posed. I will explain. If existence is purely random, whether it's the Big Bang Theory, where there was the energy in the universe exploded at a level which is beyond anything that exists within existence, more than the explosions, the atomic explosions which continuously take place in the sun, which allow the light and the heat to be generated, which is nothing comparable to that, heat and light, then existence is purely random. No rhyme or reason. It just happened. If that is the case, existence does not have a direction. It would be whatever you're able to do with what you have, with your ability, with what's available, within the material, within the universe. Whatever brings pleasure or makes one feel content and satisfied, because we're all sensual beings. Everything is related to our senses. Whatever makes us feel good, what makes us feel secure, whatever that may be, it may be purely fictitious, it may be purely fantasy, it's really irrelevant. Because everything in its essence is irrelevant. However, if existence only came about because there was a being, an omnipotent being, an infinite being, who preceded creation, and we refer to this being as the Creator. He created existence. There's no aspect of the universe, of the galaxies, what's subterranean, the oceans, the species, every subatomic particle was willed by this being, which we refer to as God himself. If there is a creator, that means there was an intent in creation. He created for a purpose. He created every species, that each species has its own innate value in the scheme of existence. The human being the most profound component of existence in his physical makeup, in his refinement, in his intellect, is his ability to express the fruits of his intellect, which is the power of speech, his agility, the ability to write, to be creative, to have choice, and not be governed only by instinct, as every other living creature is governed and dictated by. This is the human being, which takes on a whole different dimension of value. Putting the human being in this context, that he is this gifted, endowed, intellectual, expressive, sensitive being known as the human being. A human being has conscience. And that's something which is natural to the human being. There's a psycho, there's a psychology, there is an emotion. We speak about senses. There's love, there's hate, there's intense love, there's intense hate. And it is all based upon one's grasp, intellectual grasp, of what is negative, or why one should despise, detest, not tolerate something because in its essence it does not meet certain criteria in the person's life, whether it's justified or unjustified. Of course, the emotion of a human being plays and interplays continuously to affect our intellectual evaluation. Love, man is attracted to something which is beautiful, something which is sensuous. So although the human being is an intellectual being, but the senses take over very strongly. And unless the person understands through his intellect that whatever it may be, which is so attractive and so drawing, is detrimental or deceptive and threatening to his existence, he will be drawn after that. And the same is true in regard to something which is negative, we perceive as negative, but perception is not always accurate. Very often, we misperceive things. There are distortions in life. It is interesting to note, at the beginning of creation, we read in the Bible, it was evening and it was morning. And that was the end of each day of creation. And the Talmud tells us that evening, nighttime, represents the physical world. In the physical world, there are many distortions of reality. The great Jewish Kabbalist, Jewish thinker, Rabbi Luzzatto explains, very often when one is walking during the nighttime period and the location is not illuminated and we see something at a distance, it appears and it seems to be a human being. As we get closer, we realize it's a tree or a post or vice versa. As a result of a lack of light, the many distortions of reality when we're lacking clarity. Identically, being physical beings, we have many conflicts and desires which cause us to be conflicted. And those conflicts of interest don't allow us to see things accurately and perceive things correctly. And the result of that is distortion. We don't see truth, and therefore we are limited. If there is a creator, as we explained, who created, he created with a purpose. And we have to try to understand, what is that purpose? Or what was that purpose? You'd say the purpose of creation, that man should be good and should do goodness. What is good? Is good what we believe to be good? What one believes to be good, others believe not to be good. You have 1,000 people. Each person has his own understanding and interpretation of goodness. What relates to himself, this is good. Goodness. Because the person believes that if it's beneficial to himself and positive, this is good. Although the person doesn't understand the ramifications of whatever that may be. It may be good for the moment, but over time he may realize that it may have been the worst mistake of his life. So it's all purely perception. It's evaluation. There are no absolute set what is good and what is false. What is good, what is evil. There's certain things which are evil, which is totally undisputed. But there's certain things that may be perceived as evil and wrong in certain contexts is considered good, as we will give an example. Taking a human life, which there's nothing that has greater value in existence than a human life. And that's why in every civilized society that the liability for murder is the death penalty. One only takes another's life if the crime is the most serious, where the person deserves to forfeit his life. Otherwise, it would never be a consideration that his life should be taken. There's nothing more valuable than a human life in terms of the innate value of a human being. What have you destroyed? Understanding and appreciate the human being's value, we're able to appreciate why the consequence is appropriate. However, there's certain contexts where taking a life is correct and obligatory. An innocent human being is attacked, and it's a question of kill or be killed, which is termed as self-defense. You have a right to defend your existence, to preserve your life. Not only do you have a right, you have an obligation to protect and maintain what is God given to you. It is the exact act of taking a life, but in the context of self-defense, it's an unfortunate situation that it was precipitated by the attacker, but the response is considered something which is good. Talmud tells us that one must pray for fear of government. One must pray for law and order. Because if there would not be law and order in place, the human being, regardless of his moral, ethical code, regardless of his education, regardless of his intellect, people would become predators. No less than the most uncivilized animal, predator animal, were not that they would kill one another and then devour of them, but they would devour them in a living state. How is this possible? A person who's ethical and moral, sensitive, and understands the value of human life. The moment there is no longer law and order, the person, it's like a metamorphosis takes over, where he becomes a different being. Worse than the predator. A predator animal, that it behaves in its own context is purely dictated by instinct. An intellectual being, such as a human being, when he chooses to kill, God forbid, it's based on his intellectualism. It's more serious and much more dangerous than the predator animal. The scheming, the calculation to bring about that act is much more sinister. So how do we really put it into context? One moment when there's law and order, we have an ethical, moral code, where a person, if he should cross that line and violate that, he would have difficulty living with his conscience. But the moment the infrastructure of society is dismantled because there's no longer law and order, that people are held to be accountable for their behavior, everything collapses. The way I think it must be understood, and it should be understood, that a human being has a natural, innate sense of survival. We all must survive. When you read in history what people endured, despite their dire situation, whether it was persecution, hunger, physical deprivation, without any, very few amenities of life, and yet they survived. The survival instinct in a human being is something which cannot be understood. But man wants to live. And if a person's life feels threatened because it is not protected, the human being will justify every act which will guarantee that survival. Therefore, if there's law and order, we as civilized, responsible human beings, we rely on the government that they will maintain our safety. Whatever we earned, whatever is in our environment, whatever is within our community, our families, we're safe. Therefore, the ethical and moral code plays loudly in our ears, in our minds, in our emotion. The moment that is put in jeopardy, the human being goes into the survival mode. And therefore, he becomes more dangerous than the predator animal. Therefore, what is the justification to dismantle and to abandon the moral and ethical standard which each of us have. It's rationalizing, justifying any level of behavior that will guarantee that we exist. Whether it's justified or unjustified, the person may overreact. The person may misread the other person's intentions. It becomes a mindset. I'm no longer protected. I'm no longer guaranteed the safety net. I'm distracted. I can't focus any longer. Focus is a key element in evaluation analysis. The moment I am worried that my existence, my family's existence, my financial accomplishments are put in jeopardy or in question, everything becomes justified. Therefore, the Talmud tells us one must pray for the welfare of government. Because government means there is a body which oversees and maintains and prosecutes if the laws of the land are not respected and implemented correctly. That's law and order. It's interesting to note that God gave to all humanity laws which are known as the Noahide laws. The 7 Noahide laws, the most obvious is thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not be a pagan. Thou shalt not commit adultery and incest. That we understand. Not only because they're innately, absolutely wrong, because the Creator said they're wrong, but you cannot have a society where people murder and people live irresponsibly, not knowing and not trusting. Relationships and the pedigree of people become totally confused. But there's one of the Noahide laws, and this is a positive law. All the other Noahide laws, the 6 of them are negative. The negative commandments. But there is a Noahide law, which is a positive commandment, that every community, every society must establish a judicial system. And this is a divine command to every human being. You must have a judicial system, because without a court, society cannot exist. It's the guarantee that if any of the Noahide laws should be violated, should be transgressed, there's going to be prosecution. And how extreme is that prosecution? This is by divine law. This is not rabbinic legislation. It's the death penalty. The court is given the authority by God to legislate any law which the court feels that is necessary to maintain society. It could even be do not litter. If one should violate that law, they're able to promulgate that the violator, the transgressor of that law deserves to be put to death. And it's not considered murder, because it's within the context of maintaining society. Because the world cannot exist unless there is justice. And justice, as long as it's within reason is a necessity and a prerequisite for our existence.